August 20th, 2008, at Madrid-Barajas Airport, was bustling with the predictable chaos of a major European travel hub. Among the hundreds of flights scheduled was Spanair Flight JK 5022, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82, bound for Palmas to Gran Canaria in the Canary Islands. For many of the 172 people on board, this was the final leg of a summer holiday, a journey to return home to family or to reunite with loved ones. The aircraft, registration EC-HFP, was nearly 15 years old, but was a common workhorse in many airline fleets, including Spanair's. The flight was initially scheduled for a 1 p.m. departure, but the first of a series of fateful technical issues caused a delay. The air conditioning system was malfunctioning. Ground crews worked to address the problem, and after a significant wait, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate. However, as it taxied towards the runway, the pilots received an alert regarding a problem with the RAM air temperature probe. This was a separate issue from the air conditioning. The RAT probe is a critical sensor that provides data on outside air temperature to the aircraft's central computer, which in turn calculates vital performance parameters like takeoff thrust and airspeed. Following procedure, the pilots aborted the taxi and returned to the gate for a second technical check. Maintenance personnel diagnosed the issue. The official technical log noted the RAT probe problem. A crucial and catastrophic decision was made. The technicians reset the system, which cleared the warning message from the cockpit display. The log was signed off, indicating the issue was resolved, though the underlying fault with the probe likely remained. The aircraft was declared ready for flight once again. The entire process had caused a delay of nearly 2 hours. At approximately 2:24 p.m., Flight 5022 was cleared for takeoff on runway 36L. The weather was hot, a factor that reduces air density and requires more engine power and a higher speed for a safe liftoff. In the cockpit were the captain, a highly experienced pilot, and the first officer. As the aircraft began its takeoff roll, a series of critical warnings were triggered, but they went either unheard or unheeded in the high workload environment. The MD-82, like many aircraft, has a sophisticated takeoff warning system, TOWS, designed to prevent an attempted takeoff in an unsafe configuration. This system should have sounded a loud, repetitive cavalry charge horn if the flaps and slats were not correctly set for takeoff. However, the investigation later revealed a grim reality. The TOWS on this particular aircraft had a known, undocumented flaw. It required electrical power from both of the aircraft's main AC electrical buses to function. Unbeknownst to the pilots, one of these buses was not powered at the moment of takeoff because the auxiliary power unit, which provides power on the ground, had been turned off as per procedure once the engines were started. The aircraft's engines were running and providing power, but a specific circuit breaker related to the RAT probe system had tripped earlier, which indirectly prevented one of the essential AC buses from receiving power. Consequently, the takeoff warning system was silent. The most critical error was the configuration of the aircraft's high-lift devices. The flaps and slats, which are extended from the wings during takeoff and landing to generate more lift at lower speeds, were retracted. The crew had completed the before takeoff checklist, but it is believed that an interruption, likely a call from air traffic control, occurred during its execution. This interruption led to a classic case of skip following, where the crew's memory of completing the checklist was false. They genuinely believed the aircraft was configured for takeoff. The silence of the warning horn, which should have screamed at them to abort, falsely confirmed their belief that all was well. The MD-82 accelerated down the runway. It was heavy with fuel for the long flight to the islands. As it reached the calculated rotation speed, VR, the captain pulled back on the control column. But without flaps and slats, the wings could not produce enough lift. The nose lifted slightly, but the main landing gear refused to leave the ground. The aircraft was trapped on the runway, hurtling forward at over 150 knots. A desperate attempt was made to abort the takeoff, but it was far too late. The aircraft overshot the end of the runway at high speed. It continued for several hundred meters across a strip of grass before its belly slammed into the ground, tearing the fuselage apart. The aircraft then plowed through a small ditch and broke into several pieces. As it disintegrated, fuel from the ruptured tanks ignited, creating a massive fireball and a thick plume of black smoke that was visible across the airport. The emergency response was immediate and massive. Firefighters and rescue crews rushed to the scene, but the devastation was horrific. The initial impact and the subsequent fire were overwhelmingly destructive. The rescue efforts were heroic, but the chances of survival in the inferno were slim. Of the 172 people on board, 162 passengers and 10 crew members, 154 perished. The 18 survivors were all seated in the rear section of the aircraft, which had broken away from the main fuselage and escaped the worst of the fire. The crash was Spain's deadliest aviation accident in 25 years. The subsequent investigation, led by Spain's Civil Aviation Accident and Incident Investigation Commission, CIAIAC, was exhaustive. It ultimately concluded that the accident was caused by a chain of events, not a single failure. The direct cause was the attempted takeoff with the flaps and slats retracted. However, this was enabled by the failure of the crew to correctly configure the aircraft and, most critically, the failure of the takeoff warning system to sound an alarm due to the loss of electrical power to one bus. The investigation uncovered a deeply troubling background. The Ray-T probe issue that had initially delayed the flight was directly linked to the electrical fault that silenced the TOWs. Furthermore, the specific malfunction that caused the TOWS to fail under these particular electrical conditions was not described in the aircraft's maintenance manuals. The airline's maintenance procedures and the crew's cockpit resource management were also cited as contributing factors. It was a tragic confluence of a technical defect, procedural gaps, and human error. The aftermath of Spanair Flight 5022 led to significant changes in aviation safety. Recommendations were issued globally, urging manufacturers to review the design of takeoff warning systems to ensure they are fail-safe and independent of specific electrical bus configurations. Airlines reinforced procedures for checklist discipline, emphasizing the importance of completing checklists without interruption and cross-verifying critical settings like flap configuration. The crash stands as a somber reminder of the intricate, unforgiving nature of aviation, where a series of small, seemingly insignificant failures can link together to form a catastrophic chain of events, forever altering the lives of hundreds of families who had been waiting that day in Las Palmas for a plane that never arrived. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel, Red Dot Aviation.